Tyfano, Unravelling Data Mysteries is your go-to podcast for exploring the complex world of data, insights and AI. Join me, Paul Alexander, and my co-host, Professor Joe Delahunty KC, along with expert guests as we celebrate those who turn data into actionable insights. Whether you're a data enthusiast, professional, or just curious, Tyfano offers enlightening conversations and valuable insights into the real-world applications of data science. Podcast name, Tyfano, stems from a humorous anecdote amongst Tesco founders, embodying a spirit of honesty and curiosity in navigating the intricacies of data and AI.
Welcome to another episode of Tyfano Unravelling Data Mysteries, where we explore the dynamic world of data, insights and the role of technology in shaping our future. I'm Paul Alexander, and alongside me is Professor Joe Delahunty KC. Today we're discussing pandemic perspectives, data transformation in crisis. A look at how the recent global upheaval has fast-tracked digital and data innovations like never before. And we have Russell Harte, the COO at DFS, with us to share his first-hand experience of leading through this digital acceleration. DFS has been at the forefront of adapting and innovating throughout the pandemic, making Russ the perfect guest to discuss the changes, challenges and lessons of this period. Russ played a pivotal role in DFS's response to the pandemic, steering the organisation through the significant operational and digital shifts. His experience spans across crucial areas such as supply chain, logistics, technology, data and more, providing him with a comprehensive view of the pandemic's impact on business operations.
Russ, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us. Casting our minds back, the pandemic was a time of massive challenge as well as change for us, but I'd like to know what your perspective was of being an on-store retailer such as DFS. What did you have to face in terms of how to change your practices and how did you use data to do it?
Well, it does seem a long time ago, I guess, and that's because it kind of is. A lot has changed since then. But I guess if you cast mind back to that point, first of all, the first thing that changed was everybody's working practices. Clearly, we're all in bedrooms, living rooms, all sorts of places, and the ability to work remotely was really challenged. I think you saw a lot of challenge for people doing that from their personal circumstances, and a lot of challenge from a technology perspective for businesses as well. I think that's had a massive impact on the workforce generally, where you now see lots of discussion about what's the right number of days in the office and businesses asking staff to come back in more frequently and what does that mean from a flexibility and work-life balance perspective. So I think that was the biggest change to the culture of working probably that we had as a result of the pandemic, and still people are still working that through now. I think from a data point of view, how offices were used, how frequently people were visiting, what were they using them for, what's the space for, how do you generate collaboration in a remote world was probably the key things from a data perspective. And I mean, we use data a lot from the point of view of when you don't have any stores open, then your online, retail store becomes your only shop window to the world. And for a high ticket item, that's quite challenging. People generally do like to have some interaction with the product. So it was a very challenging time overall, but I think people learned quite a lot very quickly, and actually we used data to try to inform that decision making as efficiently as we could.
Do you know, Russ, you'll get used to this, Russ. I'll talk over Paul when I want to, because I want to feedback. I did not expect that answer. I gave you an open question and I thought you were going to talk about sales. Instead, really interestingly, the first thing you chose to talk about was workplace practices and how to use your staff. And I think that's a really important point to point out to the audience, which is this podcast and the people we're inviting to talk about it aren't simply talking about the profit-making industry side. It's about the people that work within it. So thank you for that answer.
I was just going to comment and say how much of what you did during the pandemic was data related and kind of getting to the data versus what you did before. I mean, because it was quite a significant transformation and swing shift from physical stores, bums on seats in the store, people coming in, they're getting people to sit on the sofas in store to moving to online.
I think because of the history that we had and how much we changed our online proposition in a couple of years before, that actually we probably didn't change that much with regards to it. There's just a much higher level of intensity in looking at it and making sure that the really small things that could have stood in the way for a customer was absolutely eradicated. So I think the level of kind of visibility of the data became much more important, and also the magnification of those little issues that perhaps in a normal world wouldn't have come to the surface were just like absolutely magnified. So you had to be as good and efficient as you possibly could from a customer perspective from online, because that was the only route you had to sales. And people were sitting a lot on their sofas at home, so they wanted something different, they wanted something new, and they kind of wanted to, at that point, if we're being honest, they wanted to spend money because they couldn't spend it anywhere. So yeah, I think the data didn't change so much. Our visibility of it changed quite a lot, and how we used it probably changed a bit. If I'm honest.
Yeah, and things like the logistics of getting people a sofa during the pandemic must have transformed.
I think, yeah, I mean, people were clearly, there were a lot of supply chain challenges, and that brought with it a lot of customer uh, challenges and issues, and people being disappointed because we were open for a period and then we were closed for a period, and shipping rates were all over the place and timelines were all over the place from across the world. So I think there was quite a lot of customer disruption during that period, and generally people were a little bit afraid from a personal perspective and from a patient's perspective. So I think we had definitely heightened customer dissatisfaction over very small issues, that we find quite difficult to resolve appropriately or quickly in some instances. Despite us doing our best. So yeah, it was a very difficult time, as I remember. I try to forget some of it now, to be honest.
But in forgetting it, how much do you think the organisation has changed as a result of it? Because whilst working practices have changed and certain things have transformed immeasurably from where they were before, do you think that it was quite quick to get back to did you kind of start to revert back to what was the normal before the pandemic, or have things changed since?
I think in many respects, not just business, we have tried to hold on to the things that actually helped us accelerate change, and keep doing that. And then some things that we did during the pandemic have fallen away, and that's not just in business, but that happens, socially as well. If you think about it, I actually quite enjoyed ordering from your table in a bar and restaurant in some respects, but that was a positive thing. Didn't have to queue at the bar anymore. But I think from a business perspective, it definitely accelerated culture change and definitely accelerated digital change without a doubt. We've tried to hold on to those uncomfortable elements of change to keep going as fast as we possibly can to change the organization. But other things were important at that time and have since fallen away. So I think there's just a balance of those things.
Russ, can I ask a
Of course you
nutty
can.
question? Which is, if under the pandemic you were basically having your window shop was the size of a iPad or possibly a TV screen, I'd just like to understand how you use data to maximize the chance of the customer seeing what they wanted to see and being able to read what they wanted to read, and you knowing that that was the type of thing which ordinarily your staff would do person to person, but you were having to anticipate those questions.
Yeah, I think that probably heightened the digital marketing approach that you have at the time. So knowing where people are looking and what they're looking for, and therefore what they're coming to your site from previously, is a much better indicator, therefore, of what they're interested in. So rather than trying to guess when they get there, using all that upstream data to really target and understand and land people in the right place. There's actually quite a small proportion of traffic these days comes through the homepage of a website in some respects. A lot of it comes from either digital marketing that you've done, targeting customers for certain products, or from content sites or Pinterest or wherever it might be. So I think we were already pretty good at that, I think, and I think our digital marketing capability has just continued to accelerate from that point forward using data to do so. But yeah, it's not as all encompassing as having that conversation. And lots of people value that, and we value that as well, because at the end of the day, we're trying to find a product for someone's home that they spend a lot of time in and on,
Mm-hmm.
and they might have for a number of years. So getting that right for people is as important to the customers as it is from our perspective. We want them to return to be customers in the future.
given the interpurchase cycle that you've got, which could often be quite long, which you've just referenced, it's important that you get the right product to the right customer.
I was about to ask about that. It's gratification, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've made the effort, you've done your research, you've then gone to the store, you've made your pick, and then you want it. You don't want to have a lead-in time. So how do you use data to know which items to have in stock or to stockpile versus those that are slightly on the fringes of likely customer satisfaction?
I think we use lots of data points for that. So, from a business metric point of view, it's profit per bay, and we have
Say that again.
profit
What
per
is
bay.
it? Profit per bay. What
So
does
if
that
we
mean?
have 75 bays in a store of furniture, then clearly every bay that we have needs to be working really hard from a sales perspective.
Right.
Now that clearly, most people are in some respects slightly unimaginative. They might like the idea of the yellow one, but in the end they go for the grey or the black. Yeah. But on the shop floor, clearly we're not
Yeah.
going to have all of the sofas being one color. So across the different segments of customer base that we have and the different types of customers and products, we clearly try to balance as well as possible to get the velocity of sales that we want from a business perspective from each and every bay, and make sure we have the right representation of product for whatever customer type might walk through the door. So we're quite a mass market brand in many respects, from a DFS perspective. Sofology probably slightly more specific from a customer set perspective. So it's trying to make sure that we have the right products for customers. There's a lot of data goes into that understanding in the demographic around the store as well. You do get differences across the UK, across many different cities, even about the size of furniture that people
Sounds
like and those
more.
types of things.
That's exactly what I'd like to know about. So, what type of demographic changes do you identify through data use?
Everything from, if clearly new housing estates going up around the store, you get a lot of I know, take Milton Keynes for example. There seems to be a lot of building around Milton Keynes currently. Every time I drive through this, there seems to be another housing estate. Houses these days are a very specific size in many respects, not a lot of living room space, etc. Compare that with a townhouse type approach in Edinburgh Old Town. So there's not only different demographics from a customer perspective, but there's a very different housing stock across the UK and around some of the cities that we have stores located in. So I think you're not only thinking about customers, but you're thinking about what's happening in that location or vicinity, and trying to make sure that you have the right products.
I'm really intrigued by that. I've got so many questions arising, but I'm going to ask the next question, which is, and what about customer behavioural changes pre, during, and then post pandemic? Is that something you've seen a shift in and you've had that perception verified by the data use?
I think you saw a shift from what people were looking for, both from their homes and from their furniture as a result. So clearly, family became unbelievably important during the pandemic. When you had lockdown and then going to being open again, there was definitely a sense of bringing people together as being important, and socializing, but more so in homes than going out initially. So I think you saw probably, I would have to look back at the data for this, but let's make an assumption that corner furniture and therefore how many people you could fit in your living room became even more important than it was previously. Could you fit that extra chair in, etc., because you were used to having more of your extended family around, those types of things. So I think I'd have to go back and have a look. I suspect we would have seen a slightly different mix in the furniture types being bought at that period of time than we perhaps would now. And there was a massive thirst for space if you could afford it. Stamp duty holiday was happening at the time. Those types of things. There's an uptick in housing transactions with that stamp duty holiday ending. I think it was about the June from memory. So there were a few dynamics that were shifting it. I think some consumer driven that were shifting how people viewed their homes and therefore the furniture they had within it.
And the shift in consumer behaviour there was a massive uptick in online, obviously, but it's that shift in consumer behaviour has stuck around.
Well, it's always shifting in some respects. At the moment, housing transactions are fairly low. We have first-time buyers struggling to get onto the housing market generally. There's a lot of dynamics that changes people's opinions and views on what they spend their money on. So there's a sustainability angle here as well, from the point of view of how different demographics would view spending money on something they might want to have for 6, 7, 10 years versus something they're maybe renting a flat or an apartment, and they know that if they move on, they may resell that sofa, or they may actually leave it, or they may seek the council to come and collect it rather than move it, or pay money to move it. So it depends very much on people's time of lives and what their next step is in some respects. But that can change depending on what's happening both in the economy and people's individual lives, really.
Can I ask a question about how you've had to up your game in terms of adjusting to a consumer that might now be much more search savvy? So customers that might pre-pandemic, I don't know, they may or may not, through boredom or t'other, choose to have a sofa. Under the pandemic, when, as you say, the entertainment scope for both spending time and also the wishful thinking that were there more people there would have changed the amount of sofa surfing on the internet they were doing. In terms of what they demand from your website and the material that you're posting online, have you seen that demand from the consumer carry on at that pace of wanting to see more information that they can make bespoke to them, or have you seen that plateau off?
I think we see consumers change all the time. If you take that specific example of the pandemic, and online has
Yeah.
always been thus, your ability to compare products rapidly across multiple websites and keep a customer's attention has always been quite short. So if you're not providing
Right.
them the experience and the imagery that they require, they'll simply move on to the next website and have a look. And therefore it allows them to compare really rapidly. We find that adding features like augmented reality and being able to design your space a little bit more at that time during the pandemic is really important. Helping people to visualize.
You became a sociologist. I didn't expect you to give that answer again. It's as though, in terms of you putting yourself in the customer's perspective, it's not just data about dimensions. You're trying to give them a virtual experience where you're trying to anticipate what they might want to see from the product they're thinking about buying.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'd actually got that before you gave me that answer.
I think it's more complicated than people really understand. And, as Russ said, if you've got 75 bays, what do you put in those bays in store? But you think about the amount of choice that comes with that. Is that sofa in fabric or leather? Has it got a footstool? Has it got cushions on it? It is a much more complicated business model underneath.
It can be overwhelming, I'd have thought.
But giving the consumer choice is the overwhelming. What choice do you give the consumer, and how do you make sure that
before they just end up being so blindsided by the amount on offer that they think I can't fathom it. So how do you help them tunnel that through?
Well, I think I'm quite a big fan of home improvement programs, let's say. So whether it's George Harte and Amazing Spaces, whatever it might be. But if you think about some of the home programs we've had over the last 10 years, how often do you see somebody walk in a house and completely discount it because of the color scheme of the living room?
Yeah.
But that's something that can be actually very easily changed. So it's not, they don't often talk about the space, the size of the floor, the windows, the light. They sometimes mention light, but actually I've seen people turn off from, they just don't like this house because of the decor that exists. It's like, but that's changeable. The fabric of the house is harder to change, but the actual decor is quite easy. So you do find people's imaginations need to be stimulated sometime. That's why, people's interactions with social media, and whether it's anything from a grand designs perspective to content on Pinterest and TikTok or whatever it might be, that incessant being able to access content quickly feeds people's imaginations, particularly in the home decor space. So, there are some quite high-end web platforms that people use to remodel their homes and get ideas for style, etc. And that's just replaced magazines in some ways. But it's feeding that imagination. It's trying to get the right product for the style that you're trying to create. It's in some ways it is quite fashion orientated for some people, and it's a statement. It's in the heart of their home. It's what other people come in, they've chosen the sofa, and that says something possibly about your outlook. Is it fabric? Is it leather? Is it super big and soft and comfy? Do you like sleeping on it? Do you like reading? And do you like an upper, a back, a recliner? What is it you're using it for? So there's a lot of individual choice, and I think both stimulating imagination and understanding those reasons for choosing that furniture is quite important. Do you have kids is a big one, clearly.
You've skirted around it on a couple of occasions, but how much is AI coming into play here? And in terms of, you talked about augmented reality, but actually, how much are you using in terms of the AI technologies, and how much are you trending in that direction? I mean, the whole world is getting faster in that direction.
Well, number one is just it's a really significant buzzword of the moment, but not without some foundation. So whether you know machine learning, which is a subset of AI, we've used as a business for a number
Yeah.
of years in various areas, whether it's supply chain or otherwise. I think from a customer point of view, there is no doubt that AI helping to create imagery, adverts, content, those types of elements will become much more profound. You know, SEO keywords for search engines, etc. There is a massive amount of scope for, let's say, Gen AI specifically being used to help that front end of the customer journey. To this point in time, we've used it more from a machine learning point of view to help efficiency. But I think with the advancements that are happening now, you will see a much more significant interaction with the front end buying journey for customers. That isn't without its own problems, like deep fake technology. You know, you've seen celebrities being used from a deep fake point of view and saying stuff that clearly they may never say, and scammers and all sorts of cybersecurity issues with regards to AI being used in that sense as well to pretend to be brands or pretend to be someone famous or pretend to do whatever to essentially make money by nefarious means. So I think it's got a great positive capability if we harness it correctly, but it's also got some negatives from a business perspective that we have to be very cognizant of and protect ourselves from, and as individuals. Um, a
Yeah.
phishing email used to be able to spot by having, spelling mistakes, etc. They are now so good and mimic context and a conversation that you might well have that it's very difficult for people to protect themselves in their personal life or even a business. So, AI brings many positives, but also some negatives.
So what you just touched upon there in your answers to Paul and myself before is two massive changes that possibly 5 years ago you wouldn't have thought would be quite so prevalent. The first is the online browse, explore, choose experience, which came through the pandemic. And the second is AI. And I'm wondering how many of those two aspects you had in your head pre-pandemic, and therefore what your learning curve has been, how far you've had to accelerate your learning growth. What do you think, Russ?
Well, my learning curve has always got to accelerate. Really, it's always been slower than it should have been, realistically. But I think if I go back those like 2, 4, 5 years, you kind of go. We always knew we had the data to make a difference. I think some of the technological advances that have happened in that period of time allows us to do it very fast. So if you have the data
Yeah.
in the right structure, in the right way, and across the right journey, then you can make actually significant improvements and significant steps forward in making that better for customers. And actually, from a business point of view, probably better for ourselves as well, efficiently. But yeah, 2 or 4 years ago, we knew that data was important, but we may not have had necessarily all of the tools. We could do a lot of personalization, etc., but we wouldn't necessarily have all of the tools to make really fast decisions about that data and what therefore we should do next.
What I know of the business and what I know of the way that you and the team around you operate is there's a couple of really important things that there is that you could do so much with data. You can transform the organization with data. You've got so much swimming around the organization right now, but choosing the things that are going to make a difference to the organization and to the customers is pretty key. And the level of engagement with your with everyone on the ground within the business who's actually interacting with a customer. Can you talk a little bit about some of the changes you made to some of the technology that the people in the stores are now using to be able to interact with customers better as a result of the data that you've got and the technology you've got?
Yeah, I think I would massively oversimplify the answer first and kind of go, having great data and great analysis allows us just to have a lot of better conversations. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of one overriding factor. I think if I think about the in-store experience, whether it's we've been able to throw large images of products up to digital signage for like 7 or 8 years, which is which still is fairly unique in the retail space. But just understanding that customers and what they're looking for, etc., is something that we're always trying to help our sales teams and colleagues be able to do as efficiently as possible. We've used data and technology in different ways from the point of view of interest-free credit and trying to speed that journey up as much as possible, all the way through to now everything is e-signature rather than signing pieces of paper and all those types of things you would expect these days. But that's been quite a big change over the last 4 or 5 years. So I think there's lots of things in that buying journey. But if I think about some of the efficiencies that we have tried to achieve internally in the business with data, it's often about data allows us to make sure that things are either happening really well or spot the things that aren't happening as well as they should be. But more importantly, it allows you to have really good conversations with your teams and putting it in the context of why it's important with some real evidence. So it's great if you don't give people context and the why, then they'll always have a doubt about why they're doing something. So that's enabled us to really, whether it's Simon Sinek, start with why or whatever it might be, giving people context is really, really important. And if we can give them the context of why we're doing this for the customer, why we're doing it for an efficiency perspective, that just makes the journey of change more straightforward.
I think you touched on something there as well, which is quite interesting, which is, and I keep on saying this to people, don't measure the false positives within the organization. If you're looking to measure the performance of a direct marketing campaign, don't look at the 3% that responded, look at the 97% that didn't and should have done, because ideally if you selected them in the right way, and so stop looking at the false positives. And that's quite interesting territory, because the data can give you the clues as to what those false positives might be.
Will it be the lost sales rather than the gain sales, won't it?
You're reminding me of a book that's been around for a long time called Freakonomics.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes the impact you have and the intent of what you're trying to measure has a completely different impact that may not have been seen. So I think thinking about it in different ways and having a diversity of people around you that think about things in different ways adds real value. So you have to be really, let's use the word thoughtful around how you utilize data and also what you're measuring. Sometimes it's those unexpected things that actually make the biggest difference. So being open-minded is a massive thing.
Yeah.
I've got one last question before I hand over to Paul, and it's just about how more demanding you have been of the data that you have accessible. If you can identify now, thinking ahead, what more you're going to be demanding from your data, what would it be?
I think.
Oh, that's a tough one. We've got a silence at last.
No, there was a sharp outtake of breath.
I think good question, really. I think we're quite demanding of the data we have had. We're quite demanding of trying to get more data to give us more richness in the insight. I think the thing that we'll strive for is, and it's a bit of a terminology thing that Paul might smile at, but I guess having a digital twin of the organization, which was once something that I struggled to get my head around, whether by judgment or luck, I guess we're not very far away from now. Excuse me. And I think being demanding from the point of view of really understanding that end-to-end journey, whether it's the customer or the business efficiency aspects, if we can rapidly model changes that we want to make, then that allows us to make better decisions. So I think in a demand sense, we have lots of data already, but I think we'll want even more, because when we stitch things together, it becomes much more powerful.
That's very good to know. Thank you. And that's a very good point at which we should think about wrapping up. Thanks, Russ, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences. It's been good, it's been brilliant as usual. But it's clear, I mean, the changes that are happening, we've just been talking amongst ourselves about things like the AI EU new regulation coming in and what that means, and all sorts of different things, and security of data, and the journey towards digital maturity and data-driven decision making is becoming even more complex, but hopefully we can help sort the wheat from the chaff. And the pandemic actually, I think, served as a wake-up call on many fronts for people who didn't have their data sorted and actually have an opportunity to sort it now. Those businesses that failed first in the pandemic were the ones that didn't really know what the customers were doing. And it's clear that you guys had your heads around it. So for those listening, we're interested in hearing about your experiences with digital transformation and data utilization during the pandemic. Has it affected the sector? Share your stories and questions using the hashtag Tyfano and hashtag pandemic perspectives. And if there are any specific challenges and innovations you'd like to know more about, let us know.
And if you've got any questions for us, then ask. And it's not when is the next DFS sales sale.
We always have a great promotional sales for that.
Yeah, we've seen it.
Great.
Thanks,
Have a great
Russ.
afternoon.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Cheers.